The Battle of Iwo Jima, fought between February 19 and March 26, 1945, was one of the most iconic and grueling engagements of the Pacific Theater during World War II. This battle pitted American forces against the entrenched Japanese military on the small, volcanic island of Iwo Jima, located about 750 miles south of Tokyo. Iwo Jima's strategic location made it crucial for both sides, and the ferocity with which it was fought has cemented it as a key chapter in military history. By early 1945, the tide of World War II had decisively turned in favor of the Allies. The Japanese Empire, which had initially swept across the Pacific in rapid succession after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, was now steadily losing ground. American forces had captured numerous islands in their island-hopping campaign, which aimed to secure bases closer to Japan. This campaign was methodically designed to cut off Japanese supply lines, destroy their naval and air capabilities, and ultimately prepare for an invasion of the Japanese home islands. Iwo Jima, a small island measuring only 8 square miles, became a critical target for the Allies because of its location and its airfields. The island lay directly between the American bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, and the Japanese home islands. Iwo Jima's 3 airfields could serve both as a staging ground for an American invasion of Japan and as an emergency landing site for bombers flying long-range missions to Tokyo. Moreover, Japanese planes launched from Iwo Jima were intercepting and attacking American bombers en route to the mainland. Capturing Iwo Jima would neutralize this threat and provide a forward base for the United States. On one side were the forces of the United States, primarily comprised of the U.S. Marine Corps. They were tasked with conducting an amphibious assault on the heavily fortified island. Under the overall command of Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the invasion force was led on the ground by Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith. The Marines were supported by naval bombardment from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, as well as aerial support from carrier-based planes. On the other side stood the Imperial Japanese Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. The Japanese defenders, numbering around 21,000, knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. Nevertheless, Kuribayashi and his forces were determined to defend the island to the last man. Unlike many previous Japanese commanders, Kuribayashi avoided the suicidal, banzai charges that had characterized earlier battles. Instead, he opted for a deeply entrenched defensive strategy, using the island's rugged terrain to his advantage. Iwo Jima presented unique challenges for both the attackers and defenders due to its geography and volcanic composition. The island was dominated by Mount Suribachi, a dormant volcano rising about 550 feet at its southern tip, with a maze of rugged ridges, caves, and tunnels stretching across the island. The black volcanic ash that covered much of the island made movement difficult for the Marines, as the soft ground offered little traction for vehicles and heavy equipment. For the Japanese, the rugged terrain became the backbone of their defense. Kuribayashi had ordered the construction of a vast network of bunkers, tunnels, and underground fortifications, which allowed his troops to remain hidden and protected from the pre-invasion bombardment. These defenses were so well constructed that even after weeks of naval and air bombardment, much of the Japanese garrison remained intact and ready to fight when the Marines landed. The battle commenced on the morning of February 19, 1945, with an intense naval bombardment meant to soften Japanese defenses. This was followed by the landing of the first wave of Marines. Initially, resistance seemed lighter than expected, but as the Marines moved inland, they were met with devastating machine gun and artillery fire from hidden Japanese positions. The volcanic ash made it difficult to dig foxholes for cover, and the Japanese snipers, hidden in the island's natural caves, picked off Marines with deadly precision. One of the most significant challenges for the American forces was the Japanese use of underground tunnels. These tunnels allowed the defenders to move unseen between positions, often appearing behind advancing Marines, wreaking havoc before disappearing again into the complex underground labyrinth. One of the early objectives for the Marines was the capture of Mount Suribachi, the highest point on the island and a natural fortress for the Japanese defenders. The assault on Suribachi was brutal. Marines had to fight uphill against entrenched positions, with the Japanese using machine guns, mortars, and grenades to slow their advance. After 4 days of relentless fighting, the Marines finally reached the summit of Suribachi on February 23, 1945. It was here that one of the most iconic images of World War II was captured, the raising of the American flag atop the mountain. This moment, immortalized by photographer Joe Rosenthal, became a symbol of American resilience and the determination to win the war. However, despite the symbolic victory of taking Suribachi, the battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. The majority of the Japanese forces were entrenched in the northern part of the island, where the terrain was even more difficult, and the resistance even more fierce. As the battle moved north, the fighting intensified. The Japanese defenders, under Kuribayashi's orders, fought tenaciously from their bunkers and caves, and American forces had to root them out one by one, often in brutal close-quarters combat. Flamethrowers, grenades, and satchel charges were frequently used to clear Japanese positions, and the casualties on both sides mounted rapidly. The Japanese, who knew they could not win the battle, were determined to inflict as many casualties as possible on the American forces. Their hope was that the high cost of taking Iwo Jima would discourage the Americans from continuing their advance toward Japan. The Americans, meanwhile, faced not only the physical challenges of the island's terrain but also the psychological toll of fighting an enemy that refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle officially ended on March 26, 1945, after 36 days of fierce fighting. Of the roughly 21,000 Japanese soldiers defending the island, almost all were killed. Only about 200 were captured alive, many of them too wounded to resist. The American forces, while victorious, paid a steep price. Nearly 7,000 Marines were killed, and over 20,000 were wounded. This made Iwo Jima one of the costliest battles for the United States in the Pacific. The capture of Iwo Jima was significant for several reasons. Strategically, it provided the United States with a critical airbase from which bombers could be launched against Japan and where damaged planes could land. In the final months of the war, more than 2,400 American B-29 bombers made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, saving thousands of lives. The battle also had a profound psychological impact. For the Japanese, it was a stark demonstration of their inability to defend even their own territory as the war closed in on the Japanese home islands. For the Americans, Iwo Jima was a brutal preview of what an invasion of Japan might entail. The high casualties and fierce resistance encountered on Iwo Jima contributed to the decision to use atomic bombs later in the war, in an effort to avoid a similarly costly invasion of Japan itself. The Battle of Iwo Jima has been remembered as a testament to the courage and determination of the soldiers on both sides. The iconic image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi remains one of the most enduring symbols of American victory and sacrifice. Today, Iwo Jima serves as both a military and historical reminder of the costs of war, particularly in the Pacific theater.